Hi, today I'm going to be talking to you about the societal expectations on women. And to do this, I'm going to be covering The Awakening by Kay Chopin and a political cartoon by Ratna Sagar. So starting off with our cartoon, we see a woman holding various items, which presumably represent the roles or tasks that she's supposed to fulfill. So, starting off with the more traditional, we see her holding a spatula, a child, and a broom, and these represent cooking, child rearing, and cleaning, respectively. Uh, and these are probably some the more traditional roles, ones that you would expect to see in most places. But I'd also like to focus on a few specific items, namely the pen and the computer. And these represent how women needs to still be educated and literate in our society, and also, as you can see with the pen, and also employable and ready for the workforce, which you can see from the computer. And I'd also like to focus on the mirror, which represents how a woman needs to still maintain her appearance and be ready for a husband while juggling all these various tasks and duties. I'd also like to focus on how the woman is posed. She is dressed wearing traditional Indian clothing and with several arms. And this is a common way of portraying Hindu goddesses, which represents how she is the ideal woman or the most godlike woman. Finally, I'd like to cover or discuss how the artist chose to frame this photograph. So we can see how the multitude of limbs are the ones taking up the most space, and this represents how time-consuming or filling of a person's life these tasks can be, and how these can inhibit the pursuing of personal desires or personal fulfillment. Now, I'd like to move on to The Awakening. So throughout this book, Edna is juggling how to balance her new desires and new wants with her old expectations. So we can see this with her trying to balance her children, her passion for art, and her various love affairs that she's gotten herself into. So in the extract that I've chosen, we can see how much dislike she has for her children when she calls them antagonists and states that they could drag her soul into slavery, which really stresses the fact of how much displeasure she derives from them and how little she wants to care for them and how restricted she feels they are. Then, when she is getting ready to enter the water, we see her taking a moment to stand under the sun naked. And this represents her casting away the expectations and the norms of society, because obviously you're supposed to stay clothed in our society, especially in public. But she chooses to ignore this, and she feels very free and fulfilled during this time. I'd also like to focus on this motif of the ocean, which has always been a place where Edna has just felt free and unrestricted. And so in this extract, she begins swimming into the water with little apprehension. She jumps right in, essentially. And then while she is swimming, she keeps going farther away and farther away from shore, not even taking a moment to look back to see if she's too far, which is in stark contrast to earlier in the book when she realizes she is very far away from the shore, and she swims hard and is terrified of dying, so she swims very hard to return back to it. But now she decides to ignore that, and this represents how she's cast away her apprehensions and decided to simply swim out further and further to a place where she feels freer and freer. So now I'd like to go over why I chose these texts. And I did because these texts really show how global this issue is. With The Awakening, we see an American, more specifically a New Orleans perspective on these expectations, and with the cartoon we see the perspective of an Indian culture, or specifically a Hindu culture. And then when comparing these texts, we can see a difference in how they decide to present this issue. So the cartoon focuses on showing just how time-consuming or stressful these tasks can be, and how they can dominate one's life. And The Awakening does cover this, but it focuses more on the journey of a woman escaping these expectations and finding fulfillment by defying these norms. So then that ties into significance because we see how dominating these tasks can be over one's life, and how little time is left for personal desires, and how women are obligated to fulfill tasks for others rather than journey to their own personal desires. But we also see how fulfilling it can be to free, because when Edna is naked, sitting naked on her son, we see she describes it as the feeling is strange, yes, but also very fulfilling and delicious. And we also see the same idea when Edna is swimming out farther and farther into the water. She has a little fear about being too far away from the shore, when the consequence of being too far away is death. Because at this point, she would rather be free than be alive, free and dead than be alive and restricted. And to that end, she dies with few regrets. So, are there any questions?
So I just wanted to ask you to elaborate.
Sorry, do you mind raising your hand so I can call on you? I don't want just random blurting out. Yes, you and the glasses.
Could you please elaborate on your ideas about having a contrasting culture between the American and Indian cultures? I felt like you kind of just spoke about it and then you proceeded to talk about how it affected the text.
So, they're not really contrasting cultures. I more specifically wanted to cover how global or universal this issue is, and that's why I wanted to compare these two cultures and these two texts, which really display in truly very different cultures, because Indian culture is very different to American culture. How these expectations are still very similar, and that reflects how universal this issue is.
But do you have any input on how the cultures specifically affect your interpretation of the two excerpts?
I think I went over that a little bit briefly with the political cartoon. I didn't mention how the political cartoon kind of posed the woman as similar to in the likeness of a goddess, which I think reflects the Hindu culture that the author was from.
I was also just wondering if you felt any particular connection to family roles within the two extracts.
That wasn't really my focus throughout this, but there was definitely that idea that women have a certain job and family as a domestic worker. So we can see this reflected in both by some of the various duties that they need to fulfill with Edna, the child, raising her children, and with the cartoon we see her holding the spatula and the brooms and the child.
And so I was just wondering if you could raise any background about the second extract you raised, the political cartoon. I was wondering if you had any ideas, if you had any background about the culture behind it, or so just some ideas about it.
Yeah, sure. This is she is Indian woman. You can see this by the clothes she's wearing, and also the religious marking on her head. And you can also tell it by the author is an Indian man himself, specifically a Hindu man. And his own beliefs are reflected in the picture and the drawing, because the woman is posed like a god, like I went over earlier.
And so, is there any religious background in that case that adds to the role of the woman?
Yeah, so as I stated before, we see the woman being posed as a god, and this is supposed to represent, or a Hindu god specifically, and it's supposed to represent how the woman represents the ideal or godlike woman.